let's begin. All this talk of Zoomers and alpha. Okay, so welcome back, everyone. So we're at the final presentation. So we have the great pleasure of being joined by Alex Quicho, who is going to present. It's a really long title, like a really catchy first title, and then the subtitle is, but I'm going to read it all anyway. So the title is GIRLSTACK, Modeling the Angelic, Cybergothic and Ultrasmooth Dimensions of the Platform Stack. And now I'm going to do the embarrassing thing of reading your bio in front of you, just for whatever. So Alex is a writer, artist, educator and girlbot based in London. She is Associate Lecturer in Speculative Design at CSM and Director of Futures at the research agency, I was going to say engine there, agency Canvas 8, Small Gods, which was published in 2021. Was her first book on, was her book on the terror and transcendence of drones, which was published by Zero Books. She is published in Wired, the White Review, Book Forum, New Inquiry, Art Review, Real Life and others, and produces texts, talks and films for institutions including Singapore Art Museum, Somerset House, Power Station of Art in Shanghai. How do you pronounce it? I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing it super
right. I think you did it right. You did it right last time.
Okay, now I'm sort of, I don't know. Now I'm the pressure of repeating. Julia. God.
Stoshek.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Collection, Rennie Museum in Vancouver, National Galleria in Berlin. She investigates technologies of girlification at GIRLSTACK, girlstacksubstack.com. A lot of stacks in there. And just as a kind of note, Alex's recent Wired essay, Everyone's a Girl Online, I would say it's like a really, I mean, I wrote here, like it's an absolute like must read. I mean, I think it's like a really, really, genuinely like a really important text that engages with and sort of dissects our like current condition. In my mind, like probably like in the most accurate and engaging way, at least that I've kind of read of recent kind of years. So I mean, especially for the students, like it's like really is like a must read. So and I will be putting it on reading lists, etc. So and also we do have the great pleasure of Alex is going to be working with us over the coming year. So so yeah, with that I welcome Alex, and yeah, that's it.
Hey everyone, I'm just going to move my bimbo machine over here so I can see you. Thanks for the intro and thanks for having me here today. I'm super excited to present to you the GIRLSTACK, which is a speculative prototype for a model of post-platform survival. So let's get into it. Before we get into the GIRLSTACK, we can talk about the stack a little bit. I know you guys have been obviously discussing bodies and stacks and the BODYSTACK all throughout this summit, so I'm not gonna like revisit the whole Breton hypothesis, but I think for the purposes of what we're gonna talk about today, it's thinking about the stack that began as a speculative proposition turned real model for understanding how seemingly abstract software operations have reshaped the social sphere, politics, and the Earth itself. So I'm guessing it needs no further introduction than that. We are more than aware of the recursive relationship between content consumption, extraction, between surveillance and satisfaction. We know that's the thing that we're implicated in right now. So the stack, in other words, is inescapable. It's no longer this kind of model for speculative or platform governance. It is laminated to the real, for better or worse, and it's a form of understanding how technology, industry, ecology, and behavior are intertwined in the present. So there's no like Luddite revenge to planetary scale computation anymore. There's no single data center to bomb, no HQ to sabotage. The stack is totally synonymous with techno-deterministic post-capitalism, or like the trap we have found ourselves in, seemingly without escape. So today we're proposing the GIRLSTACK as a sort of not the escape itself, but as a way of perhaps unlocking or like shedding light on a map to that escape. It's a way of using your subjectivity and the conditions you have to live under inside a trap such as the stack to figure out how will we survive this. And before we get into what that map, how it might take shape, how we might begin to reveal it, I'd say that we would maybe need to kind of discuss like one of the central problems of the platform stack as it is not that it has eaten the world, so to speak. So I think that there's this sort of knee-jerk reaction to thinking that, technology itself is the source of all our problems. I would say the problem is it's been overdetermined by things like UX, by things like catering to the consumer individual. Many of the societal ills that can be attributed to the platform era can also be attributed to the short-sightedness of the people that developed it. So rather than seeing software as part of an ecosystem, for example, that includes non-human life as well as human organizations, communities, governments, and other sort of unruly forces, there's this kind of problem that the platform only exists for individual consumer satisfaction. And that has landed us in this current position where we feel like we're sort of closed in, right? Like our behavior is like predicted, predetermined to the extent that persuasive marketing deepens these grooves of like desire, and are captured from every angle by like everyday technologies of surveillance. But to get a bit like semantic, I guess, the stack is distinct from the platform. The platform is like a compression of the stack. That act of laminating everything into the real, I think, is a good metaphor for understanding what is going on with the platform for us. So you guys probably saw the diagram of the stack, like it's kind of unfolded like that. You can think of the platform as something that compresses all of those, so it feels like those things are fixed and that you don't have agency in it anymore because you're stuck in this, like, you're like a bug trapped in glass. But I want to like zoom out a bit and think about like what does that mean like for us in our world and like the material that we engage in. I thought it was really interesting that the platform era is probably going to be remembered by daytime. So like monitors and Apple stores, the idea that dark mode had to be like retrofitted to these devices, and this idea that the United States' primary effective export was this like synthetic California sun. So like everything was super bright and illuminated, and so much light was like cascading through fragile, polished glass. And it's cool to think about that light as something that draws and incinerates desire. So it's very like, it's like moth to a flame kind of vibe. It like produces a lot of our desires, right? We kind of gaze into the screen, we desire something on it, but then it sort of like burns that up. Like there's no kind of substance to that desire. We'll get into that philosophically in a little bit. And this dazzling layer trained personal attention to filter out these kind of unseemly activities that enabled it. So transparency itself was assigned moral character. If you think to like a decade ago, how the kind of social good of a platform was really hinged on this idea of like, oh, now that we have everything in software, all these decisions can be transparent. You can have accountability. As companies, we want to make sure you can see how every single thing that happens here kind of happens in sight. And that was seen as like the counter to things that happen out of sight. But if anything, that was just transparency washing. You kind of had the glass screen, but it obviously is just a black mirror, right? So the sudden transformation of all content into propaganda, all interaction into someone else's money, and of course material labor and extraction into the seemingly immaterial portal were all things that were like hidden away by this like flood of light. So today, part of what we're thinking about in terms of material here is how this transference of light is like facilitated by smoothness. The predominant goal of the platform era has been to render consumption frictionless. That's been like the word that has been bandied around, right? That's like embedded in our brains, that this seamless shift between like apps and relations, the lapse into like passivity enabled by convenience. To achieve frictionlessness, the platform had to be designed to reject human traces, even as it represented and catered to human forms. And I guess it's probably important for us to remember this difference, like the trace of the human's actual kind of existence, its like ability to, or not its ability, its reality, versus the representation and the desire that's produced around the human figure. So even the problem of a smudge of oil left by a fingertip navigating the phone screen smoothness was solved by a spray of like oleophobic coating. So even the factory worker's final touch in assembling your device will dissolve itself so that you can dissolve uninterrupted into the portal. And that was like the definitive kind of relation of the platform era, is that, you know, none of these relations were meant to be felt. You were just meant to have a direct relationship with the portal and therefore with the kind of consumption that it enables. But the era of the smooth, frictionless platform is over, and someone has made a crack in that seamless oleophobic glass. And that crack is letting air into the closed system, which is activating all kinds of mutations. And the harbinger of that mutation is the girl. So welcome to Girl World. Today we'll explore how the girl is the platform's like ideal and perfected subject. And as I mentioned at the start, the examination of such an ideal subject, as per the design theorist Benedict Singleton, can help reveal the design of a trap that might be invisible to us. So Singleton says every trap is a parody of its prey's behavior. So by looking at the ideal prey of the platform, aka the girl, we can actually understand how the platform is acting on us and how we could potentially escape it. And more importantly, well, the girl as one model of understanding subjectivity, the girl's stack is something where I really wanted to help us think about how we can turn the stack inside out. We often look outside into the stack, trying to understand it as a system of organization, but I thought it was like interesting, maybe, to bring the body back into this conversation, and to see what's actually hiding inside the black mirror. And it is not really copper coils, as we'll see soon, or maybe that kind of copper coil. But before we can understand how the girl could guide us out of this trap, we have to understand what the girl is. So I'm gonna, I guess, really quickly summarize what my Wired article was about how the girl herself is a technology of subjectivity. So it's important for us to accept, or I have to persuade you guys to accept, that the girl is not any one person and she's not even any one body. She's sort of broken apart from things like social gender, biological sex, like the body that you live in. She's something that kind of exists on her own terms and can sometimes adhere to you as a subjectivity. And that's why the term girl is so polarizing. As we saw in like some of the talks earlier today, like this idea that girlishness can be something that smuggles in a lot of like action and persuasion, but is also really like infantilizing, dismissed as frivolous or immature, unmasculine, disempowering, reductive. These are all criticisms of like the girl as she is in society. Even feminists will reject the term girl as a neutralizer of things like direct action or serious political engagement. So the girl becomes this kind of attractor and intensifier of not just desire and cuteness, but also hatred, envy, and fear. She is an incredibly potent subject in that sense. And as opposed to like more mainstream narratives of empowerment, the girl is a really politically ambivalent state. As Alexi kind of touched on with the K-pop politicization, she can kind of be mobilized for any ends. And that makes her disarming yet lethal. So, you know, it's good to have her in your arsenal before someone else gets her. So today I'd like to encourage you to think about the girl as a category of subject that, like I said, unpeels from any one body. So one way of framing it is that the girl is a symbolic category. A theorist named Andrea Long-Chu, in her book Females, also an amazing read, updates this kind of old school psychoanalysis where female denotes a subject that is formed through psychological, social, and symbolic aspects of how you relate to the world, as opposed to springing from like an essential biology, for example. And she goes on to write that the female is any psychic operation in which the self is sacrificed to make room for the desires of another. So this idea that to be female is to almost be evacuated of your own agency and let you make room for other desires. Longshu makes this argument that that is essentially everyone. None of us has agency over our desire now in a capitalist environment. All these desires arrive into us from elsewhere. Which leads us to our second point, where like the girl is this consumer category, right? She can't be delinked from capital. She is the like ideal subject of consumption. If you guys are interested in this, there's a book called Preliminary Materials for a Theory of the Young Girl that was published in 1999 by a French collective called Tikkun. And everyone hates this book because I think initially when it was written in hatred of the girl. Like it was meant to be this deep critique of the existence of the girl with like the goal of like eradicating her. But I love reading it as like a girl manifesto, and like everything that they say in it, I'm like, yeah, play it louder, like accelerate it and make it real. And it turns out that we're all sick for it. So everything that they wrote and diagnosed as a girl condition as a problem is now actually in the way that the stack is part of our reality. The young girl is also laminated to our reality. For example, in 1999, they wrote that all the old figures of patriarchal authority, from statesmen to bosses and cops, have become young girlified. Every last one of them, even the Pope. They go on to quote Silvio Berlusconi as well as the ultimate baby girl. So in their book, they kind of make this argument that the girl is less of a person and more of a force. She is, and I'll quote these are like chapter titles in the book, the girl is a living currency, the girl is a war machine, and the girl is a technique of the self driven by her desire to be desired. So there's an echo with what Andrea Longshu is saying, in that her state is what coheres a society that has been empty of meaning and ritual since industrialization, like blah, 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 we understand. The world is disenchanted, the young girl reigns. The young girl is a being that no longer has intimacy with herself, except as value, and whose every activity in every detail is directed towards self-valorization. So that was written in 1999, but that is now the foundational condition of engaging in platform capitalism, so to speak. So the base architecture of our media environment, at least of our communications environment for sure, is this idea of behavioral capture. So how do you capture human behavior, make it legible, not only to the machine, but to marketing teams behind it, to achieve ever more accurate advertising and ever more seamless consumption. So the subject of the young girl has not become obsolete. She has only become intensified by this relation. And that makes everyone, all of you in this room, a girl. Every ordinary person has to, in some way, pay attention to things like their image, their representation, their self-valorization, and their relation to desire, specifically. And even if you resist appearing on a platform, you are still making a decision about that resistance. But the last part, so that's all like so far so depressing. The last part is really where we begin to see the girl as like a key to unlock the trap. Kind of mixing our metaphors here. I don't know, the escape hatch. The girl is an inhuman category. I don't know how familiar you guys might be with things like cyberfeminism and xenofeminism, but there's an amazing scholar called Bogna Konyar who teaches at NYU Shanghai, and she really theorizes girls as an inhuman condition. Inhuman not being non-human, but as something that is closer to the machine in a way that is not necessarily derogatory. So like one of the central tenets of something like cyberfeminism is that you don't reject the existence of technology to achieve your goals as a feminist. You go through it. You use the tools at hand to sort of accelerate into a mode of liberation. Xenofeminism obviously takes that to the nth degree. So I'll quote Bogna here, where she says, "The inhuman or post-human version of cyberfeminism, where patriarchy, by relegating women to the status of machines, objects, or NPCs, accidentally creates an unpredictable and potent affinity between women and technology." And she goes on to say that as we are accelerating into the era of machine intelligence, this relationship is becoming more apparent and paradoxically destabilizing to the patriarchal order. So the girl kind of emerges as a unpredictable and unruly force that holds a lot of potential for like sabotaging the patriarchal order and its like role in developing like platform capitalism. So as such, we can consider the girl to be this kind of subject condition that is closer to that of like collective or even super intelligence. And you can even do like a fun little like thought experiment where you see a lot of like the fears that are kind of burgeoning around AI. You can like replace AI with like girls. It's kind of the same thing. So in other words, the girl as she appears online enables communication between what we think of ourselves, so our understanding of our like present desires, how they're formed, and how they form our identity, so to speak, and what is becoming of us. So what are we mutating into, and is that mutation, how much agency do we have in that mutation? This quote is from The Labor of the Inhuman by Reza Negarestani. I will not summarize it today. You better ask GPT because I can't do it. So to understand what is becoming of us, we also have to understand the environment that is producing us. So enter the GIRLSTACK. The talk today, I hope I'm not boring you, but this is the kind of model that the girl subject exists in. So the piece that I wrote in Wired is really about the girl as she exists as like an entity or agent. If we think about like Gabriel's Game, for example, she's like any number of creatures kind of moving through an environment. The GIRLSTACK is a model of it, helps us understand the kind of world that the girl exists in, but again, gives us that map so we can develop our schematic for escape. So like any blueprint intended to reveal a jailbreak or a path out of dangerous territory, the GIRLSTACK aims to pinpoint our position within this hostile environment and also show us how to move with the conditions of our entrapment to arrive at the conditions for escape, but we need to devise those on our own. So just like too many animations. So bear with me, I am like deep in like a philosophy diagram here, but it'll only hurt a little bit. The central relation of the GIRLSTACK is between subject and environment, as we said. It helps us understand how the smooth subject, so the one that I sort of introduced as the kind of like starter pack platform subject, eliminates negativity and neutralizes politicization. So the ideal platform subject is someone who is kind of content to get all your packages delivered to your door and doesn't really want to engage with politics. You're just completely pleasure-oriented. And to do that, you need to kind of exist in what the theorist Paul Preciado calls the ultra-private haven of the enclosed domestic sphere. It's a kind of evolution of the atomized suburban family home. The ultra-private haven is even more atomized. It's a kind of domestic space tailored to the individual. And in the platform era, it's the enclosed domestic sphere to which everything like sex, food, entertainment is delivered. This is the ideal platform relationship. None of you leave your homes. We're all fattened like little piggies via like Amazon and like HelloFresh. But the smooth subject of peak platform has, as we've seen, become unruly. She is like mutating into forms that do not play nice with the platform's architects, even as they are continually extracting from her. So she is actually the source of continued innovation, even if she wants to just participate in regular smoothness. Like if you take like an influencers constantly innovating to outsmart the algorithm. We all know this. People are like, we're shadow banned. How do we overcome the shadow ban? Our content's not playing right. How can we like innovate how that's represented? I'm posting face, so then this bunch of text can get more attention. There's a constant negotiation with an architecture that is not quite tailored to their success, but that architecture depends on their success to exist. That's kind of Girls in Innovation 101. She is constantly antagonized by the platform's propriety and guidelines. So this is where like the patriarchal angle comes in. Consider, for example, how sex workers are at the center of the internet, the social internet. Probably anything that you use in terms of communications infrastructure on social media has probably been influenced by how sex workers have used it, because they mastered the idea of body content and profit, which is obviously what all these platforms want to achieve at the end of the day. But if the smooth subject seems passive, as I've just sort of revealed, it's a tactical passivity. So that's like a kind of central tenet of how we understand the girl. We don't want to equate passivity with a lack of agency. Passivity can be tactical. It's a question of harnessing pre-existing vectors of things like attention and desire and directing them into something that benefits you. Again, this cannot be totally apolitical. It can just be about like getting the bag. But it could be political if that's something you want it to be, as we saw with like the K-pop Taiwan mobilization. And there's this kind of idea that all these relationships had made this ultra-private haven into a zone of total exposure. So your kind of domestic sphere is also laminated to the platform. So you can think of all of us living in a version of like the Playboy Mansion or Big Brother house or Love Island villa, an architecture of surveillance that is predicated on the premise of like pleasure, privacy, and satisfaction, which in turn licenses the opposite of privacy, right? It's this forever surveillance that we are just accustomed to. That's the classic premise of the concept of surveillance capitalism and behavioral capture, how we like understand how these things exist, and that is the base architecture of the platform itself. So sorry, there's a lot of layers here, but that relation is one that I really want to like drive home as being something that I want to call the girl versus the gothic. The girl in the sense that we just discussed, but gothic in a literary sense, in both horror and like the gothic tradition. So Gothic in literature, these are stories that are defined by enclosed spaces that are animated by like inescapable malevolent forces. And these forces often lead to the like hysterical derangement of those trapped within the structure. So that's my experience of social media anyway. So to the point where the subject implicated in the enclosure begins to see the enclosure as the whole world. It's so inescapable that that relationship seems to be all-encompassing. And that, in essence, is like the conundrum of the platform, right? Like so many of us, I mean, there's so many instances where you'll read like lazy bits of journalism that assume that something is playing out on a platform. It's a direct relationship to how people feel in reality, for example. But the narrative expectation of like the Gothic as a genre is that you will pierce the veil and get to heaven, dead or alive. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the user's choice. And we'll get into that shortly. So in trad stack fashion, I would like to present the GIRLSTACK as a set of operations between the Earth labor environment layer, which we can call the cybergothic, aka the environment, the user interface layer, so the girl ultrasmooth layer, and the spiritual transcendental layer, which is the angelic layer. So let's get into it. I'm sorry this talk is going to run a bit long, but you're just going to have to deal. So let's start with the ultrasmooth. The CGI abs that I wish I had. So throughout the past 2 decades, a hypervisible minority have perfected their bodies for 2-dimensional vision. You're all familiar with this. You might know them as the influencer. With a little help from procedures both invasive and non-invasive. The pact is Faustian, where the more you feast your eyes on the feed, the more you need to simultaneously neglect and scrutinize your own form. My favorite case study in this sense is Bruneian Australian Chloe Ting, who is just one of a seasonless cast of YouTube fitness instructors whose videos have demand this kind of mental gymnastics between like making yourself do the physical activity and like slipping into the passivity of the feed. her viewership and net worth rocketed into the millions via something akin to hypnosis. Her tactics, cleverness, is underappreciated, as are many others dismissed as corrupt due to their ambivalent relationship to patriarchal ideals in relation to the body itself. It's as if there is never a difference between survival tactics and strategic moves under a hostile regime of assessment and perception. But that's a talk for another day. So the thing that I found really interesting about Chloe Ting is that there's a bloodthirsty frenzy around her, especially because her realism is contested. So in 2021, after her kind of blockbuster success, helping everyone get these abs, she posted a tearful video addressing her haters, many of whom accused her of not being human at all. So I'm going to quote some comments here because they're so good. When she blinks, she does it very slow and automated, wrote one user. Her movement here is super robotic, so it scared me, says another. Her face is weirdly smooth. She doesn't show emotions. So Chloe Ting is like a kind of case study of a particular kind of player who is like global, sculpted, rich, and femme, who has mastered the body as image and how to siphon money through its virality, maintenance, knowledge exchange, and replication. So in other words, she has turned the body into like a pure vector. And that's really important to think about in terms of the ultra smooth. The ultra smooth is not about your body as an individual, its wants and needs, how you want to actually take care of it. Like self-care is bullshit. It wants you to turn into a vector, the ultra smooth, shiny, oiled up vector. And like I said, she doesn't always play nice with the feed's architects, but that relationship is one that is incredibly fruitful and transactional at the end of the day. And her primacy and the difficulty of engaging with her, in spite of this reliance, may actually have influenced the turn of many of these platforms to bodilessness. So as Daniel explored in his video about the metaverse, for example, these companies, in the same way that they have gone looking for like opportunity white space in other markets, had to think about what those opportunities might be in overdeveloped markets. So one way of removing things like censorship, verification, and the declining mental health of dealing with your body in the stack is to remove bodies altogether. So there's this idea that the next zone of capture is a world without human form, where the body exists as pure vector without actually its like fleshed cage. Whether or not they'll succeed in doing that is another question. So I'm going to skip over some of this, but this idea that the ultra smooth body is completely contingent, like the body itself is contingent, usually elusive. The body on the platform is regulated, censored, and quite restricted in how it appears. It creates a kind of idea that the body engenders a type of numbness, but that numbness needs an incision, so like a kind of impact. So I like to reference the philosopher Byung-Chul Han, who writes in Saving Beauty that in the shined object annuls all that is placed before it. Every negativity is eliminated. So I'd say that's the kind of central condition of the ultra smooth body. It's the erasure of negativity. Every body as it appears on the platform becomes pure image in that sense. But I'm sure all of you have read Roland Barthes. Every image has a punctum. What will shatter this ultra smooth image and get us to the cybergothic? So I kind of took you through this idea of the gothic in those two senses. This kind of idea that these seamless shopping streams, hairless pornography, and numbing content verticals have always been implicated in corridors of like inescapable capture, populated by like enchanted objects that always watch and make decisions kind of independently of the agents that live within them. So the entire world is still a room, a closed set, that feed the information that it captures into these monstrous servers executing obscure commands. So this idea that the platform is a kind of like smooth, safe, censored space actually rests on the kind of like ceaseless deluge of like blood and guts. And artificial intelligence, so this like post-platform moment we're having, has not been cut free from this like gothic snarl. Also, when we think about the gothic, we can think about it as this like living trap, and we can also think about like the deep horror element. So ghosts and gore are obviously integral to horror, and they're very integral to the platform. The very term ghost workers is a technical term referring to employees who sort, label, and censor the raw material that is fed into not only large AI models, but also like platforms themselves. They are the legions of workers required to maintain the illusion that the platform is in fact a safe, smooth, seamless space where no body is ever punctured, no blood exists, and everyone's happy and consuming. So these specters witness an abundance of pornography, exploitation, and gore. They filter the bodies turned inside out by sex and violence from the bodies that are like pure, harmless, impenetrable exterior, the kind of exposed bodies of models, instructors, and influencers who kind of abide by community guidelines. So no cuts, incisions, gashes, openings, or abject excretions. All of these are like forbidden from passing into a generative system that otherwise requires your body as like raw material for it to run. So in like another piece that I was originally going to present today, I like introduced this term wetware. I don't think we need to go into the whole thing, but wetware is a kind of retro term that used to refer to the body as the intermediary between software and hardware. It's the thing, I think now people just think about it as the body, but back in the day, aka in the 90s, it was really, the relationship here was cast as like fundamentally erotic. Like submission to the machine was made pleasurable through ignorance, sabotage, and accident. So again, piercing the hard-coded or the ultra-smooth with the human remnant. Wetware can also be applied to any non-human but non-machine system. So like a seed, a brain, an embryo, a virus, a plant. But it is the fragment of eros that is embedded in every technological system, like a shard of glass in your skin. So if the ultra-smooth is a vector that conceals cybergothic reality, I think it's important to think about how you crack the glass to expose that human remnant, not in a way that makes everything bleed out, but that restores this idea of like the love artifact or like the erotic relationship with something that really strives to remove all of that and make us vectoralized. But once we locate that artifact, what do we do with it? This is the last part, the angelic layer. So that is, like I said, the kind of outcome of the Gothic is getting to heaven, whether you like it or not, whether you're like dead or alive. You guys have probably seen on your feeds that everyone is talking about like girls and angels in the same breath, and that's no coincidence. So in the Wired piece, I write a bit about this kind of linking between, so Tikkun wrote about the angel complex, so this idea to empty or delete one's physical form, they called the angel complex. Andrea Long-Chu, who wrote Females, a big section of that book looks at the bimbofication fetish as a fantasy that evacuates will. So you can see where I'm kind of going with this, like no body, no will, ultra-smooth vector. In 2019, Bogna identified that angelic dissolution can be achieved in a way that is in line with, generating more agency with machines as opposed to surrendering all agency outside of the machine. And that none of these positions are victim positions. They're not imposed by the trap itself. They are chosen as tactical passivity. These states are like chosen, not imposed. Maybe I'll save this bit for the questions part, but there's like an interesting contrast between the angelic dimension of empty bodies and bimbified evacuated will with the demonic as identified by Eugene Thacker. So demons typically scramble signals, and we could say that the internet is full of demons. Even Elon Musk has said this about artificial intelligence, that it is a demonic subject. And so the girl is a smooth, symbolic consumer subject, so the unoperationalized girl as she exists as a consumer form can potentially remain a demonic technology, one that scrambles communication and subjectivity, that scrambles the connection between earth and the divine in order to amplify the noise of capital. If you're a good Marxist, you know what I'm getting to with that. That's why the girl's third quality, the inhuman, is like mission critical to our escape plan. It's how we access this angelic layer, using the girl's inhuman qualities to create what the artist Wang Shui calls sincere decoys under the Gothic gaze of the platform. I really like that phrase from Wang Shui because it's so real. It's like how, if the thing is watching you at all times, the only way to escape it is to create decoys that it thinks are real, but then license your reality to root outside of it. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but the goal of accelerating into Total Girl is to present to the platform as this living cybergothic trap entity, a decoy that continues to appear as an empty and evacuated ultrasmooth body. It works in our favor to consider the girl as a technology of subjectivity in that sense. So still maxing out on things like desire, attraction, replication, and cunning to do things like make money, get attention, use the platform for whatever you need it to do for you. Those ends are the, but the goal of like getting to this level of creating a sincere decoy is not so that you are further laminated to those relationships, but that the real can then take root and live well inside the space shielded by your own image. So if we think about the platform as a compressing of the stack, so much so that all these relationships feel fixed and unchangeable, the girl stack, or like the angelic layer, is all about like delaminating all of that again. So there's empty space for you to maneuver within, for mystery, eros, whatever you want to call it, to take root again. So how can you be realistic and strategic about illusion so you can license the real to take root beyond its purview, like in its shadow? So in doing so, we can use this technology, girl technology, to access something once unknowable about ourselves, rather than for simple capital gain. So you're not denying your subjectivity as a girl, all of you as baby girls. You're not denying that reality, but you can just blow a kiss at individually scaled pleasures while really giving voice to the egregore, as in the totality of not just information, but experience, affect, emotion, things that are uncapturable but still might be important to you. Only then will we understand what is becoming of us as subjects, and as the stack under capitalism mutates into something worse, it gives us a fighting chance to mutate first. Thank you. Sorry, that went really long. I practiced it went faster before.
Was it really long?
Like 40 minutes?
Oh, that's fine. Okay, does anyone have any questions? Do you?
I have some questions. I really love what you said about sincerity voice, and also I'm now thinking about community interactions among girls. Just something I've observed and participated in, it's really weird to say it out loud, but like when girls say I love you or I love you so much, or the short forms of anything, what is that engineering? I can't verbalize it, but that's the kind of energy that they're creating.
You mean like when it's still on like a broadcast channel and they end with like I love you?
It could be like group chats where everyone's just sending love.
Okay, I did see someone post love is so big right now, which I thought was the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Yeah. Love has always been big. What are you talking about? What?
Yeah, when was it not big?
Yeah. I think that's like I have no like cynical view of that. I think that like the beauty of accessing girl subjectivity, I talked a little bit about like wetware and stuff, this idea of this kind of like rupturing of smooth relations. And you can see smooth relations also as like being cool, being like unattainable, being mysterious, being like affect wise, being regulated. Saying that you love someone is like a total rupture of that, right? And like a kind of interruption of that. And I think that like the fact that there's such ease in like girl broadcasts or girl groups in like exchanging and amplifying love and seeing love as like abundant, that is like a crazy like communist thing. It's like post scarcity. Love just like keeps happening. So that makes sense, I think.
I also have a second question around that, which is probably around maybe that is kind of like a counterpoint, but then it's so fascinating. Like, how do you if we see if people are not individuals anymore, is there like a culture protocol around like doxing or knowing someone like in person?
Yeah, I think that that's where maybe I didn't like convey it as much in this talk, but in the essay I was trying to like untether like you as an individual, like you as this like special lovable person, and then like individualism as like a Western consumer neoliberal blah blah blah, like individual as a consumer subject. And I think that that is something, I don't see these things as like mutually exclusive, like by appearing as a swarm or like by, you know, having aliases or like not posting face or like whatever strategies you might use to be to create and disseminate decoys, paradoxically, or like it kind of makes sense, right? It licenses the relationships or whatever that you might find matter to you, or your personal it doesn't have to be interpersonal relationships, it can be creative relationships. It licenses those to take shape outside of platform capture. So I think that's why the decoy is like a really important word here, because it's like you're like unsticking your representation in the platform from what you actually want and what you experience. So I think that's the promise of the swarm.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Oh my god, sorry. The demon is coming.
We'll get onto that in a second.
Question, but it's more of like an observation that could possibly lead to a question to me talking. I'm sorry. But I do drag, and so a lot of what I've noticed, especially with RuPaul's Drag Race, is like over drag as this like singular form, is the like intense like disguised womanification of drag into like the girlification of drag, I guess. And so I'm just wondering, like, do you see in drag? I'm starting to see like a reverse into this like Lee Bowery, like abandon the body, I guess the angelic, as you state. But I'm wondering if like you see like a break in the girl, I guess, coming or something, or if the girl is like the same. I don't know. I'm sorry. It's not like fully formed.
I was going to ask it. Maybe it's kind of similar in terms of the question that I was going to ask. Just, I mean, it's a really blunt question as well. It's like what do you see, or like what is the problem with the girl, or like what is the limit of the girl? Because I was just thinking, and I haven't told you this before, but like
translator.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I guess because I know we've talked about your article and how, I mean, certainly like on the whole, the response has been justifiably very positive, and but I know there's certain, say, like Discord servers or communities that I are a part of that have.
Where you're a girl.
No. I'm always a girl. I've gone full whatever. No, but I mean that we're discussing or are discussing your article or piece, and have, I mean, certain people have raised certain sort of like issues with it, or like so I guess it was like from your perspective, yeah, I guess like what like what would be the the problem with the girl or the kind of potential limits of the girl.
Yeah, I think that's why I'm like really adamant. I think it's my like brainworm from the commercial world. But like this idea that there's a difference between technique and strategy. I mean, this is also a political thing, right? Like the girl is a technique of subjectivity. She's a technique for producing decoys. I really emphasize the ambivalence of her because she has been leveraged for like fucked up use for like all of time, right? Like the tyranny of youth, for example. And also the, I guess the complex relationship between like gender as it's felt and gender as it's like represented. And the girl is like a hyper distillation of like femme as a construct, but I don't have a problem with it for that reason because it shows that being femme is pure artifice and that everything, being masc, is pure artifice. Like that's kind of my stance in terms of most of the, I mean, Andrea Long-Chu is like writes the book Females from the position of someone who had recently transitioned. So like all of this is about the malleability of gender inherently. So like the theory that everyone is a girl is not imposing the girl as a fixed state. It's showing like how shimmery and unstable gender categories are. And that to use that shimmer, like the annihilation shimmer, to like mutate is one way of dealing with it, but it's not a like prescription. It's like I guess like a provocation as to how we could more interestingly use gender to disappear as opposed to, I guess the article implicitly responds to I'm millennial, so I lived through like the cringe like identity, everything must be represented time, and which had some material benefits. I'm not like anti-identity politics per se. It has material benefits like at the workplace in terms of access to resources and all that stuff. But then in terms of like what stories can we tell, like how can we engage with things creatively, how can we appear in the world, and also how do we relate to ourselves, there's a hard limitation to fixed identity. So the girl kind of proposes that we like unfix that to again evade capture by the platform, by HR, by whoever might be trying to categorize you. So yeah, I think maybe that answers it.
Any other questions? I have a question about, well, maybe actually this links into the demonic, because you mentioned that maybe you would talk about that in the Q&A, and I'm super interested in that, which I guess feeds into, I mean, first of all, this is just an observation, but I was curious, I guess, like your take on it is that, and I've never seen this comment being made at towards images of any sort of kind of people that seem to present themselves as men or male. This kind of notion of like not being human, like I've noticed it a lot with kind of I mean certainly like in again I keep on referring to that Face article of Mixie and Munchie as a thing, but it's kind of
our other biblical text.
yeah, the other biblical text. But I mean, in that, I think there was kind of a comment about people thinking that, or commented on them not being human or not being real, and also like Pinky Doll has also been given like being branded in that way as well, and I guess like that NPC just generally as being this kind of like not human thing, and I guess like. I was curious about your take on that, both as a kind of term, as a kind of insult in a way, how it's often sort of targeted. Is it like, and I guess that does feed into this notion of sort of the demonic, and especially like Elon Musk's claim that, with AI we're summoning a demon, etc., etc. Like, like what? I don't know. I know this is a really fragmented question, but I guess like first of all, like what's your sort of take on this? Attack of sort of, again, principally girls or kind of females, women, like, or at least representations of them, like, is this, like they're not human, they're not being human or they're not human?
Yeah, I love that question because I think that like the human is a fundamentally unstable category, and it has historically been predicated on exclusion. And so when someone says that a particular person appears inhuman or non-human and they're afraid of it, like all I see in that is like a legacy of exclusion from the human subject. Not to be all like from the third world or whatever, but that is a colonial legacy, right? Like who was human, how the human was defined was by excluding huge categories of people who were like species-wise humans, like people from the global south, for example, people who were slaves, people who were subjects of any particular regime. So when these comments arise, that is a kind of, that vestige is still very much present. It's, I guess, not a vestige, it's an architecture. And it also demonstrates that like a prevailing regime is a patriarchal one, right? Like it's, the natural is kind of associated with like biological reproduction, heterosexuality, and within that type of heterosexuality, like the male is having precedence over the natural. So if something is unnatural, people fear it because it's disrupting that order, and then you have all the cascading arguments attached to that. That is a course in itself, a degree, gender studies. I think that answers your first part. So like, I think that's also, Wagner and I talk about this a lot, about how the inhuman or non-human should not be seen as like derogatory or like anti-human. And this is like a prevailing discourse, like in the art world, in philosophy of AI, and like all this stuff is how actually it's a discourse of greater humanism, even though it might seem anti-human on the face of it, because by accepting things historically categorized as non-human or inhuman, it's acknowledging that, the human category is really like fragile and fucked up one to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote down like the failures of the Enlightenment being like one of these things where, like in principle, like the liberty of all humans, etc., and then the task of sort of finding ways to exclude certain groups of people that allow them to continue that ideology or belief or whatever, whilst making a lot of people in the global south like not be part of that. But yeah. And
that's how the whole thing functions too. That's why like the cybergothic like gut slayer, like all those like ghost workers, for example, are from like historically like colonized areas, like places that in globalization like depended on the exclusion of people from the human consumer category to be cheap labor. And that's how like AI is built, and how algorithms are like maintained and stuff. So it's still like I mean, I was thinking, I mean, this is not really a question, but just I guess like I think just things that have come up over the last 2 days, and certainly like today, this morning, with Cream's projects, talking a lot about the kind of work and how working within the stack and within platforms, like how it actually sort of what work actually involves and how it actually impacts and how it shapes the body in various ways. But I think that's a the ghost worker is another example of that as well. Again, I mean, I think this was just, and maybe this is I guess like to do with the decoy as an approach. I mean, I think in my introductory talk or whatever, I mean, I mentioned this idea of sort of, I mean, I mentioned in the talk the stack being dumb, like, and I think like, and the platform as a kind of whatever byproduct or a kind of the stack itself is equally dumb in principle. And I was just kind of the ability to create decoys is a result of the dumbness of these things. And so I guess like maybe I was just curious in terms of like if you can like expand on this notion of like a decoy or the decoy within the platform, within the stack. Yeah, I love that you're always like myth busting the stack as this like totally like as all those relationships being as seamless as like the marketing and philosophy seems to make it happen. Like all these things work badly. Even things like behavioral capture, as someone who has worked in actually like NDA whatever stuff. When you
Were
see
you
it,
like backtracking?
Yeah.
Working
When
in
you, like-
shit. Okay, no.
When you, like, see it
in you know like tech
behind the scenes, like the information that is gathered by huge amounts of surveillance infrastructure is still interpreted in such a like stupid way. Like it still uses like legacy market research frameworks to target and understand human like the consumer individual unit, and that's why I think that creating decoys shouldn't be seen as a kind of like, oh, you need to have the most information in the world and you need to be a highly technical person to outsmart the platform. It's like, that's why I like love the phrase like girl, like you, like anyone, and like teenage girls, even without all this theory stuff, like you can just see how teenage girls are the like number one, teenage girls and sex workers apart are like the biggest innovators in terms of like communications and social platforms, like how to navigate these things to make them work for you. And I think that's a big part of like the sincere decoy thing, is that if you're like, if you accept your implication in it, you can realistically construct your protection from it. I think the like fallacy of the platform era was imagining that, you remember when all these executives would go on like digital detox retreats and stuff, this like denial that you could ever pull yourself out with your own individual agency was like ridiculous. So it's better to accept the fact that your like leg is like you're caught in the trap, and to start to understand how can you like trick this thing into targeting something. You know, like when fish have that little like dangly light, like giving yourself that so it targets that, and you can like do what you want to do over there without it capturing it. That's the sort of idea of like a decoy. This idea that you don't need everything and you don't need to be a sophisticated communications strategist to like outsmart the platform, because it is janky.
Yeah. I was thinking there's I always find like a really interesting or useful concept by this philosopher called Robert Fowler, but was then taken up by Zizek in whatever the typical way that Zizek takes up things. But in this notion of interpassivity as a kind of counter to interactivity. And it was kind of developed during the sort of, I guess, like that kind of platform kind of era where so much stuff was talking about interactivity being ultimately this incredibly positive thing, and if anything if something is positive, then it would be intensified of interactivity. And like Fowler's argument is that there's this kind of like flip side to that, is like this interpassivity where we like almost like outsource things to often kind of machines, but we still can kind of gain pleasure, still gain the same pleasure from that. I mean, the kind of prime example was like canned laughter. So if you're like watching a TV program and you have this kind of like artificial laughter or whatever, you still feel the pleasure of laughing, but you don't have to laugh yourself. Or the other example is like the lecturer who like is in the library or whatever, or kind of academic in the library, like madly photocopying stuff, knowing full well that he's never going to read this thing, but the photocopier is almost like reading it for them. But you still get the sort of like pleasure or the satisfaction of you like going through that process of reading it in a way. So I wonder, like, I mean, it seemed like that also is quite a potentially like useful thing to think of. This notion of like interpassivity as a maybe like part of the decoy as well, which maybe is kind of like what NPCs are sort of doing in a certain way. Anyway, any final questions before we have some drinks and celebrate, I guess?
Yeah, I guess I have a question. I really loved the topic. It was amazing. I was wondering what would be your opinion on why do you think like biblical language is quite more common in like cybergothic, for example, spheres, and why do you keep talking about angels and demons and flesh and all of this like kind of like I guess separate realms, and why do we keep kind of using that language to think about like our contemporary experiences, especially with technology? Sorry, it's a very messy question.
No, that's such a good question. I mean, I'm really curious as to like what you might have noticed about it too, because my instinct is that it's specific to the like anglosphere. So Benjamin Bratton's like update to the stack is that it's hemispherical, and it depends on like what language you are like engaging the internet through. And I think the philosopher Yakoi has a term, cosmotechnics, that thinks about, I guess an easier way of thinking that is like all software has like terroir, and it's like the mythologies around it, the like cosmology around the technology will be culturally inflected. So I think that if we're on like English language internet, for example, we will see a lot of like biblical references, because things like AI and climate change and whatever are really surfacing like end of times stuff, but also like foundational like creation stuff. And at least in terms of English speaking countries, like Christianity has played a big role in terms of how like enlightenment and intelligence and even the duality between like human and machine, or like man and nature, was formed. So I think there's something about that that's like latent in the like meme production. And I think that also my first book, Small Gods, talks a lot about how we have always wanted to see the divine in machines, and always wanted to kind of understand whether it's a kind of big god or small god, to understand the machine and its intelligence is something that could potentially challenge human perspective, and therefore give us access to the divine.